Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Peter Shaw. I'm with a company called N-Pulse Technologies. Actually, I'm the founder of a company called N-Pulse Technologies. And I gave a paper a few weeks ago at the G1st conference in Atlanta, the DHS conference, which Carlo sat through. And then afterwards, he kindly invited me to come and give the paper here as well. He kindly invited me to become a sponsor, too. I'm not sure if those two things were connected, but we did. So, but you know, G1st is a big formal conference, and this is a little bit different, I'm gathering, after a morning here and the comic show last night. So I thought maybe I'd just do something a little different to start with, and we'll see how this goes. So, you know, I'm not a hacker, so at least not in the terms you people are. I probably was back in the late 80s when I used to build hardware because nobody had computers, so I had to build my own, but that doesn't really qualify me. You know, if I'm going to learn something useful here, I think it's going to be how to pick locks. So, but what I have done, which might be of interest to some of you, is start a technology company about 4 years ago. And it's in the security space, and it's actually starting to do pretty well, but it's not a slam dunk by any means to get to where we are. So I thought, given looking through the themes of some of the papers, some of them were about companies and the issues and opportunities, so I thought I might just say a few words about that, if that's okay with you. So, this is, for what it's worth, some of my thoughts on how you succeed in building a small company. Now, I say success, we're still a tiny company, but we're 5 times the size we were at the start of last year. And back then it was just my partner and I, and now there's 16 people. So at least on those metrics, we're successful. We also have some pretty good customers. So how do you get there? You know, I always think the first way is to be Steve Jobs. And most of us can't be. But what that means is be insanely great at figuring out what people want that they don't know they want yet. So there's probably, you know, 5 people in the history of the planet who've been able to do that. Henry Ford was maybe another one, and he used to say if you'd asked people what he should do, he would have made a better buggy whip, because people were riding horses and they wanted whips for their horses. Nobody knew they wanted a car. And Steve Jobs used to quote that, actually. So if you want to succeed and you're not Steve Jobs, a really good thing is to be lucky. And, you know, that sounds kind of facetious. Excuse me while I grab my extensive notes here. But I don't really mean it to be facetious. You know, everybody in this room is already pretty damn lucky. You know, you're skilled, you're educated, you're successful at what you do, you work in an environment that supports taking risks and starting up companies. So that's a great start. So none of you have any of those excuses. But the thing you have to do is have a good idea at the right time. At the time when somebody cares about it, or close to something that someone cares about, something you can start from. And then you have to find, hopefully, some other people you can work with, a partner who can help you build this company. You know, even Steve Jobs had Wozniak. I'm not Steve Jobs, but I have a partner called Randy who's kind of like Wozniak. And between us, you know, we're very complementary. We can build an organization that makes up for all the things we don't have in a bigger company. You know, I'm sort of the sales and marketing guy, the process guy. Randy's an ex-military guy, ex-NSA, sleeps in the day and works during the night, cuts code, hacks things. So we're pretty complementary. And it works. So find somebody who makes up for the things that you don't have, who you can work with, be passionate about, and then find something you can do at the right time that might turn it into a business. The next thing you need to do is be flexible, because chances are that first idea you've got will be wrong. If it's not wrong, it'll be at least a little bit off from where your real success is going to be. You know, lots of examples of this. I spent much of my career at HP. Most of what I learned about being a manager and all those issues from that last talk, I learned at HP. And Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard started by trying to make a machine for controlling farming equipment. Then they tried to make something for keeping automatic scores in a bowling alley. And then they finally made it big by doing sound effects for a Disney movie. Well, none of those things are what you know Hewlett-Packard for today. Or actually the HP I worked with, which is a different company. Not the one that Carly effed up. But I left when she arrived. But the point is, you know, if you're not Steve Jobs or you're not Henry Ford, you're going to get it wrong, but try something. And then over time, the people you try it with, your customers, will tell you if it's close. And there's a really easy way to tell it if you're right, to tell if you're doing something right. If people are paying money to you to do it again, that's a real good sign that you're close. So we discovered after a few weeks that we were doing some things right. We started off making just general purpose Linux computers with some specialized hardware in them to allow high-speed capture of traffic. And we thought, people need tools like this. People like you who are doing network engineering work need high-performance tools. And we sold a few of those, but we found that people were using them for something else. So we started to tweak them, and we got into NetFlow. And then that got us into people who wanted to store data, and so we moved across to packet recording, which is kind of what we do today. Got PCAP. But we didn't forget the NetFlow bit either, and I'll explain that a bit later on. So the point is, do something. If no one will pay you for it, do something else. And keep going until you find something that people will repeatedly pay you for, and that's a good sign that you're heading in the right direction. The other thing about being flexible is I worked for HP. You know, I had 80 people and a big organization and traveled the world. When you do a startup with just you and a buddy who lives in Virginia and I live in Boston, being flexible also means that you know that ad on TV about Dave, the startup guy? You seen that one? Dave walks into the office and says hello to the mail boy, who's also Dave, and then talks to the receptionist, who's also Dave. The reality is when you're in a startup, you're everything. So whenever we needed, someone said, well, we'd like to talk to you, can we sign an NDA? It's like, holy shit, we don't have an NDA. I better figure out how to do that. So you go to the web and you steal one and change all the words. And then you actually get an order for something, you've got to send an invoice. Holy shit, we don't have an invoice. I know, I'll make up an invoice. You know, and then you've got to go to FedEx and ship stuff. Oh, first you've got to build stuff in your basement, then take it to FedEx, and then send the invoice and do the paper. So basically, flexibility also means do what it takes. Do shit. All right, so now you've got lucky, you've got an idea, you're being flexible. The next thing is stick with it. So this is actually hard work too in the startup world. But find something that looks like it's succeeding, believe you can succeed with it, throw yourself into it 100%. I mentioned that we're pretty successful today, but you know, a couple of years ago, we were really struggling to get that success. In fact, for much of 2010, our two-person company was one person because my partner, Andy, had to go and get a real job to pay the bills so he could work at night on this job. My wife paid most of my bills because she had a job. So, but we stuck at it, and persistence really, really counts. You know, again, Steve Jobs, he started way back in the 80s. It was only not so many years ago that he actually came back and made Apple the success it is today. And I can't claim any insight there either. I dumped all my Apple stock when it was about $18 6 or 7 years ago. And I wouldn't be doing anything except lying on a beach today if I'd been smarter than that. So persistence. You know, today we went from being a company that was doing a little bit of random custom work around some government agencies and companies like Raytheon. Today I mentioned we're 16 people. We're about 5 times that size. We have all of the major banks and Wall Street trading houses as customers, all of the US government, federal government agencies, and some European ones, and all of the major defense contractors. So we've learned something along the way, and I like to think we're well on the way to being successful. And then the only other thing I was going to say was, I guess I'm kind of an old guy for this audience, but my belief is that, and my experience is that when you start a company, the culture of that company is defined by how you start the company, by who you are. I joined HP in the mid-'80s, 50 years after Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard formed that company. I can tell you that everything in that company every day was an embodiment of the culture and the personality of those guys from 50 years before. While I was at HP, I was part of a group that was responsible for buying technology companies. We bought about half a dozen of them. And I can tell you that every one of them was different. Many of them didn't fit into the HP culture, but every one of them, when you stood back and looked at them, was their founder. Something about the way they dealt with people, their own people, their customers, the way they approach things. So the culture that you want to, just think about the culture thing. And I'm assuming here some of you might want to start a company. If you want to do that, think about the culture you want that company to embody. My partner Randy and I met by working at a company, another technology company, which we both left in a relatively short time because we didn't like the culture. One of the founders of that company who ran the sales and marketing side had a philosophy about customers, which was, buyers are liars. And that was the way he seriously treated his clients. And I can tell you today, 6 years later, we still get calls from former customers of that company saying, I want to deal with anybody except that company. Completely different management team in that company today. The culture persisted. So it's just an important lesson that I've learned. If you start a company, it will embody the way you behave from day one. There is a DNA in companies that propagates through time. And I hope we've done a good job of it. All right, so that was just a few words about starting a company. I wanted to do something other than just do a product pitch for you, but feel free to ask me anything along the way. So now I'm going to do a product pitch. I'll try not to make it too product pitchy. Also, you are a very informed audience. Most of this will probably be obvious to you, so I'm going to run through it pretty quickly. But please stop me if you have any questions at all. This is basically what I did for Carlo at GFirst. So we are, I mentioned, a company that specializes in packet capture. Very high-speed packet capture. We basically make an incredibly expensive DVR for your network. You know, for $120,000, we'll give you a 20 gigabits per second recorder with hundreds of terabytes of storage and capture every single packet and everything that happened on your network. So we like a quote like this, which appeared in the press just a couple of weeks before my GFirst paper, which says, packet capture is critical. Heck yeah. Actually, if you go to the URL for this link, it says, packet capture, hell yeah. But I guess the editors of Forbes magazine wanted to edit out the hell, so they changed the words before they published it. So this is what I'll run through, a little bit about the security situation today. Again, talk about talking to the choir. I just want to point out that things are very different to what they were a couple of years ago, and also that the tools that have been in place are struggling to keep up with that change. Then talk about, I mentioned that we were a PCAP company and we'd done some work in NetFlow. We think we found a really neat way to combine those. It's not rocket science, but it seems to work. Combine those two views of networks in a way that makes a powerful tool. And then I'll show you an example of that, and I'll even show you a video of it if integrated with Splunk, actually, if we have time. So, what's the situation in security today? Again, I'm talking to all of you guys, you know this, but this was a nice quote from Robert Mueller, the FBI director at our RSA earlier this year. There's only two types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that are about to be hacked. The interesting thing was, it was in an article in the New York Times, which was titled the Bright Side of Being Hacked. And what they were really saying was the exposure and the security issues that modern networks face are finally getting some attention at the executive level. So the bright side is the awareness of the issue is being raised. So, you know, what are some of the things that are changing today? Well, the first obvious thing is networks are much faster. You know, we like to say 10 gig is the new 1 gig. Everything we do these days is 10 gigabit per second. We make tools for the 1 gig world and the 10 gig world. 2 years ago, we sold a few 10 gig and all 1 gig. I doubt we sold any 1 gig tools this year. So the challenges are really at the high speed link. We have a single customer who has a telco customer who has a lot of 10 gig links, and they're recording 200 terabytes a day per link, and they've got 16 links in the core of the switch where we're installed. So do the math. I think that's 3.2 petabytes a day that we're capturing for those. So a lot of data. Even a typical firewall in a large corporation today is generating gigabytes of data per day. So you've got speed, you've got complexity of traffic, big data. I just saw this on the weekend, actually, talking about speed. There was a company called Prolexic that does DDoS testing or defense technologies, and they pointed out that in the last year, attacks at up to 20 gigabits per second have become common. They were very rare just 12 months ago. And in fact, some of the peaks were at 65 gigabits per second in all those bank attacks you probably heard about last month. BB&T, Citibank, Deutsche Bank, a lot of banks got attacked last month under DDoS attack. So speed is absolutely becoming an issue. Of course, networks are a lot more complex, even than they were just a year ago. Any of you that work in larger companies probably already have lots of different vendors' equipment spread all over your network. I can't tell you how many times I go into, I don't know, I'll name drop Morgan Stanley or Bloomberg, and I'll say, well, I've already got one of everything on the market. Why do I need you? And it's absolutely true. So it's incredibly complex, and that's not just my kind of equipment. That's Cisco and Juniper and routers and firewalls and Palo Alto and FireEye, and there is a huge amount of different types of equipment in there covering thousands of nodes in a typical network, billions of packets and billions of flows going by every day. And then all these new issues about mobile devices and bring your own device and cloud issues. How do you defend a network in this environment that's so complex? There's this APT term, more sophisticated threats coming along. I know it's kind of a buzzword, but I think a classic example of what this really means is the big attack on RSA last year. Well, RSA is a leading security company, but for 10 days, a piece of code was sitting inside their network, exploring servers, trying to find interesting things to send out of the network. So that qualifies as an advanced persistent threat. It just came in as I believe it came in as an email to the finance department entitled "Next Year's Headcount Plan." If you're a finance guy, why wouldn't you open that? Somebody did. And for 10 days, it roamed around the secure servers in RSA pretending to be someone from finance. Very difficult. How are you going to figure that out? Lots of cloud data attacks, so new threat vectors, as we say in the jargon of the space. Oh yeah, we don't quite fit on the screen, do we? That's okay. Wasn't an interesting point anyway. Cybercrime. I love this Operation Pharisee. You guys probably know it better than me, but what better name for an attack on the Vatican? I just thought that was amazing. So, and then the various federal and government attacks. So lots of activity, lots of new attacks, new sophistication of attacks going on. This was another interesting data point. It's a company called Imperva that does monitoring of website attacks. And they did a survey of 40 different applications that are widely used in business. QuickBooks, Salesforce, Oracle. And they found that on average, a site hosting those systems is attacked every 2 to 3 minutes of its life. And this is across Europe and North America. So once an attack starts, up to 10 attacks a second. So a very difficult environment to defend. So basically, that's the difficult situation that people have to defend against today. More complex, more subtle threats happening at much higher rates in a much deeper pool of traffic. So very, very difficult to get a picture of. And there was actually a survey of CIOs across Europe and North America done earlier last year as well by the SANS Institute. And they found that the number one problem people were claiming to have was, my network is so complex, there's so much going on, I can't actually tell what's normal and what's an attack. So that's the environment. What about all those tens of vendors and millions of nodes that are being defended by lots of different equipment today? How's that working out? Well, if you want a simple example, this is data from the Identity Theft Research Center, and they looked in 2011 at reported attacks on major US corporations. So these are self-reported, so you can presume they're underreported. There were 414 reported incidents in 2011 with 22 million records compromised. The most important thing, forget about all the words on the slide, the most important thing is that in 50% of those 414 cases, the cause and source of the attack and the vulnerability are still unknown. So if that's not a risk, I don't know what is. And in 2012, so far means up to G first, so that was in August, there were 213 attacks and 63% of those were still unresolved. So the current tools are not giving people enough information to work out how they're being attacked and therefore how to defend against it in future. Speed's, of course, an issue. Most equipment that's deployed today in any kind of defensive situation is designed for that 1 gigabit world again, and we're in a 10 gigabit world. So my sales manager loves to say that, oh, that's a 1 gig solution for a 10 gig world, let us help you with that. So a bit of a cliche, but it's really true. But if you can't see everything that's going on, you're not going to be able to defend against it. It's really funny how these breaks all happen differently on the Mac. Just a word on signature-based tools like intrusion detection, intrusion prevention systems. If they don't recognize something, by definition, they're not going to stop it. So remember, new threats evolving quickly. You're not going to defend against them by comparing them to past incidents. And this is just an interesting comment from Palo Alto, but it relates to that APT. The focus today is on getting inside a network and doing damage while you're in there, not just getting in and saying I broke in, but actually, and this is like the RSA threat, where a piece of software existed on that network validly for an extended period of time and potentially did a lot of damage. And we think of this as the problem with addressing these kind of situations is you typically don't have the data to go back and figure out what happened, where, for how long. Because if it didn't just happen and you saw it just then, most systems don't keep any record of what happened 10 days ago in the RSA's case when this intrusion actually occurred. They didn't. And they have sophisticated tools like NetWitness, which they bought. So we think of that as DNA. If you can't go back and look at what the heck happened, you can't resolve a way to defend against that in the future. And it was just another quote. So I mentioned that we were a company that focused in packet capture initially. We got into NetFlow. We had a product called Dragonfly. My partner Randy's very good at coming up with product names. He was walking with his daughter one day, saw a Dragonfly, liked the way it could go wherever it wanted and see everything. He thought, wow, that's like a sophisticated monitoring tool. Let's call our product Dragonfly. Our current one's called Hammerhead because it's got big eyes and can see everywhere, I guess. He comes up with the names. But breadth and depth for us meant we had this NetFlow product, which gives you a wide view across a network, and then we were in the business of packet capture, which goes all the way down to the frames on the wire and looking at every bit that goes by. And we discovered that we had a special benefit by being able to combine the two of those. So if you think about it, the different sets of views you can have into a network, right at the bottom there you can capture everything. Petabytes a day in the case of a telecom network. That's the optimum database you can have to resolve any kind of attack, but it's incredibly costly and incredibly difficult to do. More typically, people work at the top layer with statistics and device logs, which abstract certain amount of information and raise flags and alarms and conditions that can tell you to go and try and resolve a situation. The nice thing if you've got the traffic at the bottom is you can recreate all of those other things. But bottom line is there are different levels of resolution that you can have when looking at a network. The two that we focus most on are full recording, so PCAP, packet capture, and NetFlow. And they have different attributes. NetFlow gives you something about every flow. Every transaction between two IP addresses is recorded, time, traffic type, source and destination addresses, and so on. So what we call envelope information is retained, so it gives you a relatively compact view of every transaction that happened on your network. On a busy network, that's still gigabytes of data per month, but if you structure that correctly and you want to go and search for some event or look for anomalous behavior, you can query that traffic in seconds. So what you've got is a wide view, but not a lot of deep data. PCAP's almost the other way around. Again, you get something about every transaction, but you retain the entire traffic set. It's just like your DVR at home. You know, I was out last night, I missed something, I want to know what was on TV from 8 till 8:30 on this channel. Well, that's exactly what we do. Something went wrong with my mail server last night, I want to see all the traffic that went into this IP address between 8 and 8:15 last night. Let's see it again, let's replay it, let's duplicate the situation. In this case, though, it's petabytes per month, and if you want to go and search for something undesirable in PCAP data, and you're searching gigabytes or petabytes of data, you can literally spend months searching for it. We have government clients in unnameable parts of the government who literally will spend days or months searching for particular sequences in deep packet records, whole rooms full of disk drives. So if we just look at this again, the same thing again, that what we believe you should do is use something like the flow level to figure out if something's going wrong. Just look at what's happening, kind of get a sense of what your network should normally look like. And then if you see something go wrong, quickly drill down to the packet layer and reconstruct the actual event. And that's pretty much what we do. Start with net flow. If something looks anomalous, go and look at the actual traffic that caused it. If it turns out to be bad, problematic traffic, come back up to the net flow level, look right across your network and see if it's occurred anywhere else. Have you got multiple infections? And so on. So we call it pivoting between the PCAP and the net flow view, the wide view and the deep view. And these are just some of the typical queries that people might use. I'm assuming everybody's familiar with net flow data, so net flow. So, you know, just look for things like what's my usual ratio of inbound to outbound traffic. If the outbound traffic suddenly peaks, maybe some server on my network is sending out information it shouldn't be doing, maybe. And so on, you know. Am I occasionally seeing traffic to a particular IP address? Well, maybe that's an agent of some kind inside my network that's beaconing out data that shouldn't be going outside the network. So these are the types of things you can look for. So if you take that net flow view where you can quickly query activity on your network or search for particular types of traffic and combine it with the very deep information of the whole packet store, you can more quickly resolve issues. But it does mean that you have to have some capability to capture all of that traffic at very high speed, which means for a 10 gig link, which is the main deployment today, means at 20 gigabits per second, potentially. And just coincidentally, that's what we do. So we make this product I mentioned called Hammerhead. It's an appliance, different kinds and sizes depending on the mix of connection ports and the amount of storage and how fast you want it to go. But it basically does three things. It captures traffic very, very quickly, just like a DVR. On the fly, it indexes it using flow data. So we separately build an index that you can search with any kind of query, but we're storing data to a large disk array or externally to a NetApp array. And then we enable you to quickly retrieve any part of that data that fits the search you want to make. We actually also provide the ability to replay traffic just like a DVR. So a lot of our customers will capture network in the wild, traffic in the wild, bring it into a test lab and replay it into test devices where they maybe tune the firmware or something and see if that attack they captured in the wild can be defended with a new set of firmware. So packet capturing means you must be able to, if you want to use packet capture to resolve security issues and do forensics, you need to be able to capture everything. So you have to be able to capture at 20 gigabits per second. You want to be able to search it quickly. You want to do it in an open format, because I'm sure every one of you already uses some tools of your own which you don't want to give up that use standard traffic formats like, standard file formats like PCAP. So we do everything in PCAP format. It's all Linux-based open systems. You need to be able to store a lot of data, and you need to make it, of course, it needs to be cost-effective. Now, I threw out the number of 120K a moment ago, and that's probably, a lot of people might not call that cost-effective. But I can tell you we just did a proposal for a large telecom company in Miami where we competed against some known large companies in this space. The bid for the business was $22 million from them and $3.5 million from us for exactly the same notional performance, but without the 100% recording that we do. So it is actually cost effective because we use completely off-the-shelf hardware and open systems tools. I think I've already talked through all of this, so I don't want to bore you with the product stuff again. But I will if you want me to. So basically, we just put these appliances around a network. We have a centralized flow database, which you can query from either the API or from our client or from some third-party analysis tool. And it just looks like this. That's just a status screen showing how much traffic is being captured on different ports, how much this utilization is. At the bottom, you can zoom in, grab a window of traffic, scroll around. Maybe you see a spike in traffic. You might want to go and look at that. If you zoom in on the traffic, you get something that looks very familiar to any of you who use Wireshark. And this is actually, in this case, a set of flows from a window on that status diagram. And if you zoom in on one of the flows, you get something that looks even more like Wireshark. In fact, it is Wireshark. In fact, it's T-Shark. So it's the server implementation of Wireshark. We run it inside a browser. So you can be anywhere doing Wireshark in a browser. Your probe can be anywhere else. And we do statistics of various kinds as well. So you can set alarms and watch for parameters to vary beyond some range that you might set. I mentioned NetApp. That's just showing that we recently did a joint venture with NetApp to stream lots and lots of data to them. It's kind of a match made in heaven for us because we're in the business of generating ridiculous amounts of data and they're in the business of storing ridiculous amounts of data. So it works pretty well for us and gives a small company like nPulse a lot of credibility. And there's a pretty diagram which nobody probably really wants to see. So let me just summarize here. We've got very complex networks, very high speeds. You or your employers or your companies have a huge investment in existing solutions of all different types to try and defend your networks, to analyze what's going on. And you don't want to throw those away. And then there are these point technologies like ours that we want to throw into that mix and do things that couldn't be done before. So we think there is a way to combine those, and we have another name for this. I mentioned Dragonfly and Hammerhead, so we have something called Pivot2Pcap as well, which is just the name for our API. So basically, you take our Hammerhead product, drop it in your network, and you've got a 20 gigabits DVR, 20 gigabit per second DVR. Through the API, you can talk to it from command line, from a third-party software product, from our GUI, whatever you want. And then we've got a growing number of third-party companies that have linked directly to our product inside their tool. SourceFire was the first. ArcSight's a big one. We're a sponsors of the Suricata organization. That software is linked, directly links to ours now, and a number of others, like all of these. Hadoop, Silk, Splunk. So what does that look like? So I mentioned we just make an appliance. All we really do, pretty simple, we capture and index traffic. So you can go back and find the interesting piece very, very quickly. We did some work with HP ArcSight a couple months ago. And this is how that works. Your ArcSight system is sitting there monitoring what's going on your network. some event occurs, so it triggers an alarm. Out in the network is a range of NPulse products. The ArcSight system sends a description of the event to Hammerhead. Hammerhead says, let me go and search on my flow records and return the traffic that might have caused that. And we send it back to ArcSight. So right inside your ArcSight window, without any other change, you see the actual packets that caused the incident that the system has just triggered on. Some of you probably use SourceFire as well. Exactly the same. So this is Defense Center. This is a list of events that SourceFire has identified. If you click on one of those, you'll get a high resolution statement of what that threat actually was. And then within SourceFire itself are 3 links at the bottom which let you go straight to our Hammerhead system and pull back the packets and flows that actually caused that alert. You could just pull back the actual data and look at it in Wireshark, or you could open it directly in Hammerhead and see it in T-Shark, or you could just get a list of all the flows resolved and then explore them, search through them a little bit more. This window at the top, this Google-like window, is actually a pre-populated search generated by SourceFire to search for traffic on the device. If I can figure out how to use a Mac, let me see if I can do this without making a fool of myself. No, I can't. Oh, it's that one. Oh. Okay, so this is just a little video demo that some guys in our lab did to show how easy that API to what's essentially just a packet recorder sitting in your network can be integrated with other applications. So the first thing that we did was just create a very simple Splunk app, a dashboard. Sorry about this intro. I mean, it needs music. You know, long ago in a network far, far away. There was music, but I killed it. It was country and western music. So that's just a dashboard for Hammerhead showing lots of traffic going by, how many flows, how many bytes. But then here's the dashboard for Splunk, for Palo Alto Firewall. And what we're doing here is just drilling down to a list of events detected in the Firewall Manager. So these are all the events. If we right-click on one of those, it will pre-populate a search in Hammerhead. You have to log in the first time. And when you go over to Hammerhead, there's the pre-populated search at the top. We run the search. We're looking through terabytes of data, and up come all of the flows that actually triggered that event. If you want to look at it in more detail, you might choose to actually download those flows, actually the packets that make up those flows, and look at them in Wireshark. And that's exactly what's happening here. So all of this is done just through the Splunk app space. And here's a FireEye one. So in this case, we're in the FireEye Splunk dashboard. We're saying, show us the traffic for this particular IP address and any events. Now it's showing us some of the security events that FireEye has flagged. If we right-click on one of those, it'll pre-populate a flow search in Hammerhead. So now we're searching through many gigabytes of data, and up comes Wireshark showing the exact data that caused that event on the FireEye system. The nice thing about this is nobody at FireEye or Palo Alto was harmed by this experiment. We haven't even talked to them. This was just something the guys in our lab did because those apps exist on the Splunk site and our app exists on the Splunk site, and because they use a common data format, they can talk in this way. So that's really it. Sorry, it's a bit like a product pitch, but I'd be happy to answer any questions about packet capture or about starting a company for that matter. So. Thanks very much. No chocolate, I'm sorry.